Bitcoin's passage through the $50,000 mark has been a huge moment for the industry. Just a few short months ago, bullish analysts were predicting that Bitcoin might end 2021 over the 30K mark. However, things have moved much more quickly than almost anyone could have expected. As such, the amount of interest suddenly coming into the Bitcoin world from around the globe is huge. Bitcoin is booming and everyone wants a piece of it. Recently, finance magnates sat down with Peter Wall, chief executive of Argo, to speak about how Bitcoin's meteoric growth is transforming the global financial world and what needs to happen before widespread adoption can truly become a reality. Argo is a company that describes itself as, quote, a publicly traded blockchain technology company focused on large-scale cryptocurrency mining. I'm Rachel McIntosh, and this is FMTV. So first of all, Peter, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show. So happy to have you. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Sure. So I'm Peter Wall. I'm the CEO of Argo Blockchain. Argo is a publicly traded cryptocurrency miner that is listed on the London Stock Exchange. And I've been working at Argo for 3 years now. I took over CEO in January of last year. And it's been an interesting, 12, 13 months, Rachel, since I took over. It's been, obviously, we've had COVID, which has been kind of a backdrop to everything. And then we had a Bitcoin halving in May of last year, which was a big event in the crypto world, in the Bitcoin world. And then since, the fall, we've had the increased focus from institutions on Bitcoin and then the incredible run that Bitcoin's been going on for the last 3-4 months, and it's been quite a ride.
I can imagine, and I have to bring this up because today is kind of a momentous day in the cryptocurrency world, because today was the day that Bitcoin crossed over the $50,000 mark for the first time, which is just crazy. And as you said, you kind of picked the perfect time to take over as CEO, just given everything that's happened in the past 12 months.
Yeah, the timing has been great. I mean, when I took over, well, for the first 6 months, you might have said the opposite, because Bitcoin had that night, which I'll never forget, where it fell from 10,000 to 5,000 in a flash in March of 2020, and then the halving was some white knuckle moments, and margins were tight, and yeah, so it's been trial by fire for sure, and then obviously the next 6 months, the last 6 months have been incredible. But I like to say, there's an expression. He was an overnight sensation, 15 years in the making. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about Argo, our company, because we've had a great run over the last while. And people are like, wow, Argo is so amazing. But, I think the reason why we've had a great run is because we've built credibility. We've built a track record. We've built knowledge in the space. And all of that has led us to where we are today. So sometimes it does feel like it's happening all really quickly, but and I think with Bitcoin in general, it's been around 12 years now. There's a track record of credibility to the network and the system that is created. And I think that's, I think I had a mentor that used to say, Rachel, people tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate the impact of technology in the long term. And I think what we're seeing now is people have been underestimating the impact of Bitcoin in the long term for many years, and now we're catching up to the actual impact that it's having. And so it feels like it's happening all of a sudden, but it's actually been building for many, many years.
Right. I love that he was an overnight sensation, 15 years in the making. I feel like you hit the nail exactly on the head, with Bitcoin and with Argo. So can you talk a little bit about the history of Argo?
Yeah, so Argo was born out of the 2017, 2018 bull run and the interest in Bitcoin that happened and cryptocurrency that happened back then. And there was a couple entrepreneurs out of Canada that looked around and saw what was happening and thought, wow, this is amazing. In North America, there's companies that are going public and that are giving ordinary folks an opportunity to invest in a cryptocurrency company. But when they looked over at the UK, they didn't see any folks that were doing that, and so they saw kind of a greenfield opportunity, and they went over and started having conversations with investors and lawyers and figured out, tried to figure out if they could do it, and everyone was really interested, and so that's when I got a call and said, "Hey, Pete, we're going to do this thing. Do you want to be a part of building out the operations?" Because I had a little bit of experience with Bitcoin going back to 2013, and I said, great, yeah, I'd love to get things done, love to be part of a startup, and then we were off to the races. So we hired an operations team in the part of Canada where I was living, and we set up a test facility, and the original concept was mining as a service, so to offer mining packages for people at home that could mine on our computers, and then the Bitcoin would go, or whatever coin we were mining would go directly to them. And that was the story and the narrative that we launched on in August of 2018, when the company went public on the London Stock Exchange, and it was the first cryptocurrency company to list in London. And then very kind of quickly we figured out that actually it's a better business to mine directly for ourselves. We're really good at mining. We understand the technology cycles. The whole kind of mining for consumers was just overly complicated, and so we pivoted to just mining directly for our own account in the first quarter of 2019, which was 2 years ago. And essentially since then have been building out our infrastructure to where we are today, which is, facilities at 6 different, or operations at 6 different facilities in Canada and the United States, and just under 1 exahash. So about 850 petahash right now. It's climbing because we're installing machines, this month. And at the end of the second quarter of this year, we'll have 1.7 exahash of mining capacity up and running.
Amazing. So, and you guys, sort of started as first, mining for consumers and then mining for yourselves. But Argo has also started to branch out into kind of a blockchain technology company. And you've got some investments in the blockchain space. Can you talk a little bit about how your growth has kind of caused the company to become more than just a mining company?
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head, Rachel. Like, we do think of ourselves as a blockchain technology company, meaning we're not just pure miners. We don't just mine straight Bitcoin. We're interested in being around for the long term in this, and being part of this thing, which is changing the world's financial systems as we know it in real time. And Bitcoin is obviously a huge part of that. It's a great store of value. It's a great thing to hold long term, and we encourage everyone to hold Bitcoin. But at the same time, there's lots of innovation that's happening beyond Bitcoin. Things like DeFi, things that are being built on the Ethereum network, smart contracts, and there's all kinds of interoperability projects of blockchain projects that are really amazing. And we invested in one back in 2019. So we've always kind of been looking at different projects. We invested in one called Polkadot back in 2019. That's done really well. And we ended up taking that investment and spinning it into another investment in a company that is essentially looking for the next Polkadot. They're an incubator of DeFi projects and Web 3.0 projects. And that's also based in the UK, and are continuing to look for other opportunities like that, Rachel. So not just we're not going to stop there. We've got some internal things that we're doing ourselves, and other partnerships that we're exploring, because again, I think the impact on the proof of stake side, not just on the proof of the work side, proof of work being the mining side, but the impact that's coming on the proof of stake side, I think, is going to be real and long lasting.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say that, when it comes to, so obviously Argo wants to build, as you said, something that's going to be around for the long term. But would you say that sort of DeFi, investing in proof of stake projects, is that some kind of a guiding principle for the investments that you're making, the decisions that you're making that will guide that long-term growth?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that we look at ourselves as people who are trying to create yield off of any blockchain projects that are out there.
Okay.
So, obviously Bitcoin mining is a great way to generate yield, because you're making new Bitcoin, and you're buying machines and paying getting enough Bitcoin back to pay for them in a fairly short period of time if you're doing it well and you've got the right infrastructure in place. I think it's the same thing on the DeFi side. I think you're looking to take, crypto assets and put them into projects where you're going to generate yield. And that's what's really exciting about DeFi right now, that the kind of returns that you're getting off of some of these projects are pretty remarkable, but they're also practical. And, the developments that we've seen in DeFi, 2 years ago, everyone was talking about DeFi, or everyone in the space was talking about DeFi, but no one was actually doing it. Last year, everyone started doing it, and it became like a real thing. And it went from, $500 million assets under or assets in DeFi to where it is now, which is, like 20, 30, 40 times that. Right. So now we're in a place where it's going to become more and more real, and there's going to be more and more people who are engaging in it, and we're going to be part of that.
Right. Okay. Super exciting. So I mean, when you guys have had like a 1,300% increase in the value of Argo shares in the past year, would you say that the majority of that growth is driven by investments in DeFi projects, or is it Bitcoin, or is it sort of an even split of the two?
I think the growth that we've seen over the last the last 12 months, particularly the last 3 or 4 months, has been because we've made a concerted effort to tell our story and to engage with shareholders both in the UK and in North America that are interested in blockchain projects, that are interested in cryptocurrency miners, and have looked around and said, certainly looked around 2 months ago and said, who are these guys? How come they have X amount of petahash, but when you look at them compared to company X, they're way undervalued. So I think that's been a big part, is there's been a re-rate based on a valuation that we had that was out of whack with some of our publicly traded competitors or publicly traded peers. So I think that has been more than anything the level of interest in Bitcoin, the great margins that we've been putting up, and then I would also add that we've made it also a really strong effort to be transparent and open with our shareholders. So we put out monthly updates. I do Twitter Q&As. We've done a lot of media, and I think people appreciate that transparency and the amount of engagement that we've tried to do with real ordinary retail shareholders, not just institutional shareholders. And I think we're seeing a little bit of maybe more than a little bit. I think we're seeing a real shift of power in the publicly traded markets towards retail shareholders. And obviously we just went through this whole thing with GameStop, and that was an extreme example. But on a smaller level, I think people are putting their investments into things that they believe in. And cryptocurrency for many people is something that they believe is going to change the future. And when they look around, they see companies like ours, and they want to invest.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up the the GameStop thing, because that's been such a huge, as you said, a demonstration of the shift in power that's happening. Also, which has shed a little bit more light on the DeFi space more generally. But speaking of news cycles, one of the things that's come up with the recent rise in price that we've seen in Bitcoin is this thing that sort of always happens every time Bitcoin is catching headlines, which is like there's this other group of headlines that are like Bitcoin uses as much energy as Switzerland or the Netherlands or New Zealand or something like that. So when we've seen Bitcoin rally in the last week or so, we've seen a lot of those headlines coming up again. And I wanted to ask you, as the CEO of a company that does Bitcoin mining, can you speak at all to, the sort of the discussion that's happening about sustainability and Bitcoin? What is Argo doing to make Bitcoin mining sustainable? And do you think that's an important part of Bitcoin's future over the long term?
I think it's a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. I think it's a super important part of Bitcoin, particularly as it becomes more mainstream. And you've heard people like Michael Saylor talk about the importance of having using renewables to mine Bitcoin. And we're proud of the fact that it's something we talk about. I've spoken a lot about it. I've spoken quite a lot about it. Our facilities in Quebec use hydropower, so that's 100% renewable power. And the facility that we just announced that we're going to be building in Texas is in a part of West Texas where over 90% of the grid there is powered by wind, mostly by wind, but also some solar. And so our goal is to have, the vast majority, and at hopefully some point, all of our machines being powered by renewable power, because it's definitely, if we're going to be, it doesn't make sense, Rachel, to be burning coal to make Bitcoin. I mean, that's just not cool. We don't. Yeah. The planet has enough problems as it is to be adding, carbon to the atmosphere to create Bitcoin. So I'm a believer in using renewables to mine Bitcoin, and it's something that we're going to be pushing, and hopefully other companies, will follow us along. We've got a few other things we're working on internally, which I can't get into right now, but it's 100% on the agenda, and it's something that we value for sure.
Absolutely. And you mentioned briefly just, other mining companies. When you go to conferences, when you go to, when you're in conversation with other people who are working in the industry, but not necessarily at Argo, is sustainability something that you would say, does it come up? Is this sort of something that, the industry is thinking about as a whole, would you say? Or is this something that you feel like Argo is sort of spearheading?
It's a good question, and I haven't been to a conference for a year.
That's a good point.
An in-person conference, because I haven't been on a plane for a year.
Right. Yeah.
Given this current state of the world, I think it's something that's on the agenda, and I think it's company by company about how high it is, in terms of the level of importance and the level of discussion. It's something I talk about for sure, and there's other folks who talk about it, but I don't know internally, how important people are rating it.
Right.
But again, I think it's something that should be super high.
Right, absolutely. And yeah, if Argo is making so much Bitcoin, through sustainable means, that's really impressive and really cool. So congratulations for that. I want to switch gears and kind of go back to what we talked at the very beginning of this interview, which is the fact that Bitcoin is over $50,000 as of today. I'm curious what your opinion is about, 50,000, 10,000, 25,000, all of these are just sort of arbitrary numbers in a sense. But on the other hand, each one of them has had an important sort of psychological thing. Each one of those numbers has generated some kind of, news cycle. We've crossed these milestones, which the community has sort of collectively chosen for Bitcoin. Why do you think that is? Like, what is the significance of 50,000 in your opinion?
Well, I think the significance of 50,000 is that it's a round number that's halfway to 100,000, and it's all of these round numbers. They seem to be barriers. I think a lot of people put like in their trading systems, they put stop losses or whatever at certain numbers, and so generally they tend to be more than just a psychological barrier. They often tend to be a trading barrier that once you're through. And I think today we broke 50K, but then it came off, and then it'll test it again. It'll take a couple of punches at 50K before we break through, just like it took a couple at 40. Right. It's never this thing never goes straight up. There's always ups and downs, and that's part of the fun of it. But I think 50K is just it's remarkable that we're there, and people have been saying for a year, Bitcoin is going to get to 20K. It's going to break the all-time high, and then it just blasted through it, and it just continues to climb. And I don't make predictions. We have a guy on our team, Sebastian, who loves to make or doesn't. Well, he often gets asked to make predictions, and he's often very accurate. But I tend to just try to make sure that the company is healthy at whatever number Bitcoin is at. So obviously, the higher the better. But it's hard to predict exactly, how quickly it's going to climb. We think in the long term, the trend is very clear, and it just continues to grow, and it's outpaced certainly my expectations. But who knows where it's going to end up?
I want to talk now about what your thoughts are on what this milestone means for institutional adoption. I mean, obviously, before we hit this $50,000 mark, Tesla had just announced this big, huge investment. MasterCard just announced that, made a Bitcoin related announcement. And now there's sort of rumors, people are predicting that Apple and Microsoft and Walmart and other large companies might be making investments in Bitcoin in the near future. Do you see that happening?
I think that I don't know, to be honest, Rachel. I don't know how quickly some of these, like, Apple and Google and I don't know how quickly they're going to get in. I think companies that are super progressive and forward looking, obviously Michael Saylor was the guy, at MicroStrategy who has set the course and been sharing with everyone about how he did it. Mm-hmm. And since then, we've seen, PayPal and Square and Visa and MasterCard are now talking about crypto. I think they've all had it on their agenda. These companies tend to, move slower than we think, kind of behind the scenes, and all of a sudden these announcements come out. But I think they've had it on their, Visa and MasterCard in particular, have had it on their agenda for a long time. I don't know about how quickly, some of these super large corporations are going to come around. They tend to move very slowly. I think what do I like to say? People always ask me, should I buy Bitcoin? And I say, the best time to buy Bitcoin was yesterday, and the second best time to buy is right now. Yeah. So I think the way I certainly look at Bitcoin, both from Argo's perspective and my personal perspective, is, why would you not want to have an asset that is constantly appreciating over time as part of your portfolio, as part of your treasury management or wealth, personal wealth management strategy? I mean, it just makes sense to hold it. And it's shown in the last 6 months that, while there are, daily movements that are, you've got to have a certain stomach. It's better sometimes not to watch, that in the long term, the direction is pretty clear. But I don't know how quickly that's going to sink through to corporate America. I mean, these tend to be conservative organizations that don't adopt things quickly, and that's part of their strengths and also a huge part of their weaknesses.
Right, that's really true. And we've also seen, speaking of Michael Saylor and some of the other sort of like hedge fund managers and people who are the face of like the wealth of America in many ways, like, have described Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, particularly over the last couple of months. When you're talking with clients, with institutional clients, or just engaging with people, investors in the space and generally, do you feel like that's the reason why people are buying Bitcoin? Is it, a hedge against inflation? Is it, something like a portfolio optimizer? What is it?
I think there's a bunch of different forces at work. I mean, in terms of institutions that we talk to, I mean, they're generally talking to us about buying, Argo. They're not necessarily talking about buying Bitcoin, although obviously, right, we're correlated with the price of Bitcoin, and when Bitcoin goes up, we tend to go up. And obviously, we've also outpaced Bitcoin in the last little while. So, that's another reason why people are attracted to us. But I think there's a lot of different forces at work about, why people buy Bitcoin. I think the smart people, absolutely, it's a hedge against inflation. And they look at, the cash that's been printed by central governments over the last 12 months to deal with, COVID. And they say, this doesn't make sense, that the increase in the money supply is just way too fast, to not have inflation take place. So I think I think we're going to see, inflationary times coming, if they're not already here. And Bitcoin is a great hedge. There's no doubt. It's digital gold. It's gold 2.0. I think there's also people who buy Bitcoin because of a fear of missing out. And there's the great crypto expression FUD, fear, uncertainty, and dread. And the people who buy for FOMO then often experience FUD. I certainly haven't experienced any FUD recently because I'm so confident in Bitcoin long term that even if it goes down 10%, then it's going to come back. There's so much strength in the market right now and so much belief that this thing's going to be around long term. That those of us who are hardcore believers I've never sold a Bitcoin at all. And Argo, we try to sell as little as we can. So I think, to answer your question, I think there's a bunch of reasons why people, buy Bitcoin. And I think that the smartest ones are people who, treat it like digital gold, buy it and hold it as absolutely long as you can as a store of wealth.
Okay. Fabulous. Peter, I want to thank you so much for your time. But before we go, can you tell our listeners a little bit about where they can find out more about Argo?
Sure. So our website's argoblockchain.com. And our Twitter handle is @ArgoBlockchain. And my Twitter handle is @PeterGWall, WALL. And we're very active on social media, particularly on Twitter. So great to have you follow us. And the story continues. It's pretty wild times.
Yes, definitely.